We're looking for Jerome Baptiste. We have reason to believe he is working in this hospital illegally.
I don't care what you believe. You're not going anywhere near my staff without proper authorization.
Ma'am, we're federal agents. We don't need your permission to execute our duties.
Actually, you do. This is a
Patient
hospital.
privacy laws, employee protections, you go through administration.
The security cameras at St. Mary's Regional Hospital captured something I've never seen in 12 years of researching civil rights cases. At 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, 8 ICU nurses in scrubs formed a human wall across the 4th-floor corridor, blocking 3 federal agents from reaching their colleague. Not aggressively, not violently. They just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, and said no. The agents had badges. They had tactical vests. They had an administrative warrant with a name on it. What they didn't have was verification that the man they wanted was actually the person they were looking for. And what they didn't expect was an entire intensive care unit refusing to let them take someone without proof. The standoff lasted 47 minutes. Every second was recorded, and it would lead to a $14 million verdict that changed how federal immigration enforcement could operate in hospitals across the country. Real quick, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments because this story about workplace solidarity is something everyone needs to see. And if you're new here, subscribe now. What happened in that ICU hallway will restore your faith that people still protect each other when authority overreaches. Jerome Baptiste had no idea that Thursday would be the day his coworkers became his shield. Jerome was 34 years old, 7 years into his career as an ICU nurse at St. Mary's. He'd been born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, brought to Brooklyn by his parents when he was 2 years old, fleeing the political violence that had made their neighborhood unlivable. He grew up in Flatbush, attended New York public schools, worked 2 jobs to put himself through nursing school at SUNY Downstate, and graduated with honors. He'd chosen critical care because he wanted to work where outcomes mattered most, where skill and vigilance meant the difference between patients living and dying. He was exceptional at his job, the kind of nurse doctors specifically requested for their most complex cases, the kind who could spot a patient deteriorating 30 minutes before the monitors caught it, the kind who worked doubles when the unit was short-staffed and never once complained. His performance reviews used words like outstanding, irreplaceable, and the gold standard. His coworkers loved him. His patients, the ones who survived, remembered him by name years later. Jerome became a United States citizen through naturalization when he was 19 years old. He had the certificate framed in his apartment. He had a U.S. passport he'd used to visit family in Haiti twice. He voted in every election, local and national. He'd even served on a grand jury the previous year, something only citizens can do. He paid taxes. He had a 401k. He was saving for a down payment on a house. He was as American as anyone born on U.S. soil, with a paper trail to prove it. That Thursday afternoon, Jerome was assigned to 2 patients in the ICU. A 67-year-old man recovering from emergency cardiac surgery, and a 43-year-old woman with septic shock who'd been in critical condition for 9 days. Both required constant monitoring. Both could deteriorate without warning. Both needed Jerome focused and present. He had no idea that 3 ICE agents were in the hospital elevator, heading to his floor, carrying a warrant with his name on it. Jerome was at his patient's bedside, adjusting an 4 medication drip and talking softly to the sedated woman. Research showed that hearing was often the last sense to go, and Jerome believed in treating patients like people, not just bodies connected to machines. His charge nurse, Patricia Reeves, appeared in the doorway with an expression he'd never seen on her face, equal parts alarm and fury. "Jerome, don't react visibly, but we have a situation." He kept his hands steady on the 4 line. "What kind of situation?" "ICE agents. In the unit. Asking for you by name." His heart dropped. "ICE? Why would IC be here?" "I don't know. But they're at the nurse's station right now demanding to speak with you. I told them they can't interrupt patient care without going through proper channels. Dr. Kim is backing me up." Jerome felt his chest tighten. He was a citizen. He had papers. There was no reason for ICE to want him. But he also knew that reason didn't always matter when federal agents decided someone didn't belong. "What do I do?" Patricia's jaw set with determination. "You finish caring for your patient. I'm not letting anyone, federal agents or not, disrupt care in my unit. They want to talk to you, they can wait until you're at a stopping point, and they can do it through proper hospital procedures. Through the patient room window, Jerome could see the nurses' station. 3 agents in tactical vests stood there, clearly agitated. Patricia positioned herself between them and the rest of the unit, arms crossed, radiating authority. Dr. Helena Kim, the attending physician, stood beside her. And now other nurses were gathering. The entire day shift, about 8 nurses total, forming a loose semicircle that physically blocked the agents from advancing into patient care areas. The hospital's security cameras captured everything. Every angle of the nurses' station, every corridor, every doorway, high-definition footage that would later become Exhibit A in a federal lawsuit. Jerome tried to focus on his patient, but his hands were shaking. He finished documenting in the electronic chart, double-checked vital signs, and took a breath. Then he stepped out of the patient room. The moment he appeared in the hallway, one of the agents pointed directly at him. That's him, Jerome Baptiste. Patricia immediately stepped in front of Jerome, blocking the agent's path. You're not speaking to any of my staff without proper authorization and hospital protocol. The lead agent, his name tag reading Morrison, pulled out a folded document. This is an administrative warrant for Jerome Baptiste. We have authority to question him about his immigration status. Dr. Kim extended her hand. Let me see that. She was an immigrant herself, from South Korea, who'd come to the U.S. for medical school and stayed. She understood both healthcare systems and immigration bureaucracy. Morrison handed over the document. Dr. Kim read it carefully while the entire ICU staff watched. This isn't a judicial warrant, she said after a moment. This is an administrative document signed by an ICU supervisor, not a judge. It doesn't give you authority to enter a hospital and remove an employee during their shift. It gives us authority to question him and verify his status, Morrison said. Maybe in a public space, not in a hospital where he's providing critical patient care. You want to question him, you schedule an appointment through HR like everyone else. We don't need an appointment. We're executing this warrant. Patricia's voice cut through like a blade. You're in an intensive care unit. We have 12 critically ill patients whose lives depend on continuous skilled nursing care. You're disrupting that care, you're violating HIPAA by your mere presence near patient areas, and you're creating a hostile work environment for my staff. You need to leave. Now. Morrison stepped forward, trying to move around Patricia. Jerome instinctively stepped back. And then something happened that the security cameras captured perfectly. Every nurse in the unit moved. Not aggressively, not violently. They simply positioned themselves between the agents and Jerome, forming a human wall across the corridor. 8 nurses in scrubs, standing shoulder to shoulder, blocking access to their colleague. You're not touching him, Patricia said quietly. You're not questioning him. You're not taking him anywhere. Not without proper legal authority. Not without hospital administration present. And definitely not during patient care hours. Morrison's face flushed red. You're obstructing federal agents. We're protecting our colleague and our patients. There's a difference. One of the other agents reached for his radio. We need backup at St. Mary's Hospital, 4th floor ICU. We have multiple subjects interfering with an immigration enforcement action. Dr. Kim pulled out her cell phone. And I'm calling hospital administration, our legal department, and hospital security. Let's see who gets here first. Have you ever seen coworkers stand up for each other against people with badges and authority? Drop a comment because what I'm about to tell you next shows what real solidarity looks like. The tension was electric. The agents couldn't push past the nurses without physically assaulting healthcare workers, which would be catastrophic on camera. The nurses weren't backing down. They'd made a collective decision to protect Jerome, and they were committed. Jerome stood behind his wall of colleagues, overwhelmed. These were people he'd worked with for years, people he'd shared holiday shifts with, covered for when they were sick, celebrated promotions and babies with. And now they were literally putting their bodies between him and federal agents. Jerome, don't say anything, Dr. Kim called out. Don't answer questions. Don't provide documents. Not until we have legal representation present. Morrison tried a different approach. Mr. Baptiste, we just want to verify your status. If you're here legally, this will be quick and simple. Don't respond, Patricia said immediately. Ma'am, you're advising him not to cooperate with federal authorities. That's obstruction. I'm advising my employee to exercise his constitutional right to remain silent and to have legal counsel present. That's his Fifth Amendment right. Are you suggesting he should waive his constitutional protections? Morrison had no answer. The standoff continued. 2 minutes passed. 5, 10. The agents couldn't advance. The nurses didn't move. And Jerome stood there, watching his colleagues defend him with a solidarity that made his throat tight. Hospital administration arrived 22 minutes into the standoff. The head of HR, the hospital's legal counsel, and the chief medical officer convened a quick conference with Dr. Kim and Patricia while the agents stood at the nurses' station, visibly frustrated. The hospital's attorney was direct and uncompromising. Gentlemen, I've reviewed your administrative warrant. It doesn't give you authority to interrupt hospital operations or remove employees during patient care. If you want to question Mr. Baptiste, you can schedule an appointment through HR. He'll be advised to have legal counsel present. But you're not doing this in the middle of the ICU during his shift. We can detain him for questioning, Morrison said. Not in this hospital, you can't. You want to arrest him, you need a judicial warrant signed by a judge. Administrative warrants don't give you that authority. And if you try to physically remove him from this facility without proper authorization, we'll file charges for kidnapping, assault, and violation of hospital regulations. The HR director stepped forward with a tablet. Jerome Baptiste has been employed here for 7 years. His I-9 verification was completed when he was hired, showing proof of citizenship through his naturalization certificate. His employment eligibility was verified through E-Verify. He's provided a U.S. passport for identification purposes. His social security number is valid and matches his name. We have complete documentation proving he's authorized to work. So I'm curious, what information do you have that contradicts 7 years of verified employment? Silence. Do you have any evidence of fraud? Any reason to believe his documents are false? Anything beyond a hunch or a tip from someone? More silence. The answer came 2 days later, and it was infuriating. ICE had received an anonymous tip that Jerome Baptiste was in the country illegally. A database check had shown that a Jerome Baptiste from Haiti had an outstanding deportation order from 15 years ago. But it wasn't the same Jerome Baptiste. It was a different person with the same name who'd left the country over a decade ago. The database had flagged the name without checking dates of birth, social security numbers, or any other identifying information. The agents had shown up at St. Mary's to detain Jerome based on nothing more than a name match in a database, without verifying they had the right person, without checking employment records that would have immediately shown he was a citizen. It was a catastrophic failure of due diligence that had nearly resulted in a U.S. citizen being detained in front of his patients and coworkers. Jerome filed a federal lawsuit 6 months later. The complaint named the 3 ICE agents individually, their supervisors, the regional director, and the Department of Homeland Security. It alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment, attempted seizure without probable cause, the Fifth Amendment, attempted deprivation of liberty without due process, and the 14th Amendment, racial and ethnic profiling. The security footage from the ICU was devastating evidence. It showed agents arriving without warning, demanding access to Jerome, presenting an administrative warrant based on insufficient identification, and attempting to remove him during patient care. It showed 8 nurses forming a protective barrier. It showed hospital administration defending their employee. It showed the agents ultimately backing down when faced with institutional resistance. The depositions were damaging. Why didn't you verify Mr. Baptiste's identity before attempting to detain him? We had his name and location. That was our verification. Did you check his date of birth against the deportation order? We didn't have access to that information in the field. Did you check with the hospital to see if he had employment authorization documentation on file? That's not our procedure. What is your procedure for ensuring you have the correct person before attempting detention? We verify based on the information provided. You were provided only a name. Is that sufficient verification? Silence. Expert witnesses testified about Fourth Amendment requirements. Law enforcement cannot seize someone based solely on a name match without additional verification. They need probable cause that the specific individual is the subject of their investigation. The nurses who'd formed the protective barrier testified as well. Every one of them stated they'd do it again without hesitation. Jerome is my colleague, Patricia testified. He saves lives in our unit. He's one of the best nurses I've worked with in 25 years. When those agents tried to take him without cause, without even verifying they had the right person, I wasn't going to let that happen. We protect our own. Should healthcare workers be protected from immigration enforcement while they're caring for patients? Let me know in the comments because this jury was about to answer that question definitively. The trial lasted for weeks. The jury watched the security footage repeatedly. That moment when the nurses moved in unison to block the agents, the standoff at the nurses' station, the hospital administration defending their employee, the agent's ultimate retreat. They heard Jerome testify about the terror of seeing ICE agents at his workplace asking for him by name, about the confusion of being told he was subject to deportation when he'd been a citizen for 15 years, about the panic attacks that followed, the therapy required, the months of looking over his shoulder. I've dedicated my career to saving lives, Jerome said from the witness stand. I work in critical care. My patients are dying. That's not dramatic. That's the reality of ICU nursing. And that Thursday, I had 2 patients whose lives depended on me, and federal agents tried to remove me based on nothing more than a name they hadn't even properly verified. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Their verdict was clear and unanimous. Liable for attempted unlawful seizure. Liable for negligent enforcement. Liable for violation of due process rights. Liable for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Compensatory damages, $3.8 million. Punitive damages, $10.2 million. Total $14 million. The message was unmistakable. You cannot attempt to detain people based on inadequate information. Names alone are not sufficient identification, and the cost of laziness in enforcement is measured in millions. The 3 agents were terminated within a week of the verdict. Their supervisor was demoted. ICE implemented new protocols requiring verification of at least 3 pieces of identifying information before any detention attempt. Name, date of birth, and either social security number or physical description. Supervisors were now required to review all information before authorizing field detentions. And hospitals were designated as sensitive locations requiring additional authorization before enforcement actions could take place. Mary's Hospital became a case study in institutional protection of employees. HR conferences used their response as a model for how to handle federal enforcement attempts. Legal seminars examined how the hospital's attorney had defended against overreach. And nursing organizations held up the ICU staff as examples of professional solidarity that should be replicated everywhere. Jerome used part of the settlement to create a legal defense fund for healthcare workers facing similar situations. He partnered with immigrant rights organizations to provide training on how to respond if ICE appears at your workplace. And he continued working at St. Mary's, in the same ICU, with the same colleagues who'd stood between him and detention. 2 years after the incident, the nurses' station in St. Mary's ICU got a small addition. A plaque mounted on the wall behind the desk, placed there by hospital administration. It read, "On this unit, we protect our own. We stand together. We defend each other. Always." It didn't mention the incident specifically, but everyone who worked there knew exactly what it meant. The day 8 nurses said no to federal agents. The day workplace solidarity became more than just words. The day a human wall proved stronger than badges and warrants. Jerome kept a photo on his phone from that day. Not of the agents, not of the confrontation, but of his colleagues, standing shoulder to shoulder in the ICU hallway, their scrubs still on, their expressions determined. The caption he'd written underneath was simple: "My people, what would you do if federal agents showed up at your workplace to take a colleague without proper verification? Would you stand up? Would you form that human wall? Would you risk your own job to protect someone you worked with?" Drop your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely want to know. And if this story reminded you that solidarity is powerful, that standing together matters, that ordinary people can say no to authority when authority is wrong, hit that subscribe button. These stories aren't just about lawsuits and settlements and dollar amounts. They're about people choosing courage when it would be easier to look away. They're about coworkers who become family. They're about nurses who understood that protecting Jerome wasn't just about protecting one person. It was about protecting the principle that you don't get to take someone without proof, without cause, without basic human decency. See you in the next one. And remember, we protect our own.